Well, thank you. And like Fred said, beyond affordable housing, most of these commercial and childcare facilities are not cookie cutters, and they sometimes can be overwhelming. But just to underscore, and Lucille talked about it this morning with our brownfield site, daycare center, you can really partner with other faith-based institutions or other nonprofits, or go to institutions like the Practicum Center. They can also help facilitate these transactions.
Yeah, I think you're exactly, because what happens where we see the problem in the marketplace is groups come to us with a really good plan, but no head for numbers, and they haven't laid the numbers out. And that's the problem: is the commission trumps the money, unfortunately. And that's where you have to be prepared, because when you go to look for the property, you go to set your budget, you really need to do that prospectively, because to try to do it retrospectively, it's not going to work.
But Jim, I would like you to also talk about once a person does vision and they know what they want, and then they identify the project, let's say it is a daycare center. How do they work with the organization to find the land
Very
if
simple.
they don't have it?
Usually what happens is they'll come to us and say, I want to open a daycare center. We get that a lot. I actually speak at the CDC and with women who are planning to set up daycare centers and tell them what they need to do. And there is a fair amount of government money for helping setting up daycare centers. What they'll do is they'll come in and they'll say, I'm running a daycare center out of my house. I've got 12 children and I want to get into a daycare. What you need to do is contact the people who are the experts, because obviously daycare centers have large requirements for capital outlay to build. So you've got to get a sense. Now once you've decided that you have the capital, whether it's to purchase or to lease, we will help you based on zoning requirements, obviously daycare is the egress issues. We'll work with you in your neighborhood as to where you want to be, and we'll identify suitable properties, but we'll also identify suitable rents. Because in most instances, it's going to be expensive because you're going to be using commercial pieces, retail pieces for daycare. And with that, because it has to be ADA, it has to have egress, it has to have the other things, it's going to be, candidly, not a difficult thing to find. It's a question is difficult to afford.
Once a person identifies a piece of land, or if they already own it, let's say a lot of our churches own land, can anyone on the panel talk to us about how they can evaluate that potential use, what they could build on?
Anyone? Well, that's a zoning issue.
We have architects on our staff, but it does depend. I do think your strategy comes first a bit, because if you're going to partner with CPC, then you don't need to go, get an independent architect to evaluate your site. So you have to think a little bit about what your strategy is. Because if you know what you want to do, and there's a great partner to do it, it's certainly worth starting to talk to them earlier on in the conversation. But assuming that you're trying to get a little further down the path yourself, you've got your own CDC, or at least before you make those decisions, you want to know. There are some valuable ways that an architect can help you. One thing you got to be a little careful of is, what architects love to do is design buildings, and you have to make sure they kind of go step by step with you. It's hard. Architects, they don't make as much as lawyers, and so they don't do a lot of pro bono work. If you have ones in your congregation who can do pro bono work, that's great, except you also really want architects who know a bit about the thing you're talking about. If they've never done childcare, they're not going to know anything about the egress or the zoning required. So you want an architect who's done the thing you're talking about before, but you want to be a little careful with them and ask them to kind of parse the pieces of work with you a step at a time, because otherwise they'll get way ahead of themselves. So if you're starting from a piece of property that you have, pretty easy for the architect to tell you how it's zoned, what that zoning allows, how big the building can be, if it's housing, if it's commercial facility, if it's commercial. If you're starting from a need, we want to do X, also pretty easy for the architect to say, here's the kind of space you're going to have to be looking for, is what the zoning should be. Now, zoning is obviously flexible, so you can propose to get it changed if you already own a site, or if you acquire a site. But at least it's a good place to start. What could we do here, or where could we do this project we want to do as of right without a change? And getting, so that's sort of step one. I kind of think of that as the pre-development. Then, further down the road, once you've got a site and a program, there's still two very different things. The first one that doesn't cost that much, and the second costs a lot. There's a very schematic architectural design. This assumes you're sort of building something out at this point. You've got a site, you think the financing's going to work, but you don't have it in place, you've got to get down the road a little. You You want schematic design at that point. You want a little sketch out, kind of an elevation, maybe a quick, pretty picture. If you're going to be taking it to folks who you want to fund it or to finance it, some basic layouts, and a pretty high-level cost estimate. And I would stop your architect there. They're going to then want to drill down and spend a lot more of your money doing. That's enough to get you in the door with financial institutions, to get you in the door with philanthropic organizations and elected officials, and get you down the road enough to where you really know that you're going to be able to finance this project. And then, when you've got the financing starting to be pretty well lined up, and you're really in more serious conversations, and you know the financing is going to come, you can spend the money and start moving to construction documents and really start to design the building. And there are architects who will take it in those steps with you, but some of them, not really through any fault of their own, they just love to start designing the building. And that's kind of far down the road. And again, I just would take it in steps because we get groups all the time who come in and say, we've got this lot, so we want to get going, design the thing for us. And unless they've really done that vision work, thought organizationally about what it's going to mean, thought about their strategy for partnering or how the development's going to get done, thought about the financing gap, you're going to wind up having spent some money on an architect, but be really still back before step one. At the same time, if you can get an architect who's flexible and work with you, as you're moving through the process of different pieces that you need.
And one thing in light of in following up on that is what we've seen in certain instances, you're community-based, so you know what's going on in your community. Be aware that a lot of developers are building buildings and looking for ways to build more. And one of the ways they can build more is community use bumps. And where the zoning gets enhanced by a community use group coming in and taking a portion of the building. So if it's a daycare center or something like that, you may actually find a person building in your neighborhood who would welcome a partnership with you because it would give them the right to put you into that space and therefore enhance the building.
I want to encourage people to watch out for one thing, though, that's happening in a lot of Brooklyn right now that affects your institutions because right now there's a lot of concern about overdevelopment in many of our neighborhoods. People coming in and building big buildings bigger than folks want in their neighborhoods. And so people are moving to this thing to try to get city plans to give them what's called contextual zoning. That's a zoning usually that has an A or a B after it. So if you're in an R6 area, you go to R6B or something like that. The A and the B take away your community facility bonus. They don't let, in some ways, part of the problem is like in Manhattan, NYU is doing a lot of the overdevelopment. So people have used these R6A and B zones to height cap everything at a somewhat lower level and take away the bonus. So if your neighborhood's being rezoned and you own a piece of property that you've been thinking about doing a development on, you probably want to get involved and make sure that at least your parcel isn't rezoned from R6 to R6B. And if an institution owns a piece of property, has a good mission, and goes to city planning and says, okay, we agree that the neighborhood should be rezoned, but this piece of property we really would like to keep in a way where our institution could meet its needs, you can often make that happen, but only if you're kind of in the game early on, because otherwise it'll wind up